For more than 30 years, the most powerful criminal in New England ran 6 states from a vending machine shop. The address was 168 Atwells Avenue, Providence, Rhode Island, a squat, unremarkable storefront called the Coin-O-Matic, wedged between Italian bakeries and social clubs on a street whose center median was painted in the colors of the Italian flag. On warm days, the man who owned the place would carry a folding beach chair outside, set it on the sidewalk, and sit there watching people walk by. Neighbors said good morning. Cops drove past and didn't stop. And from that chair, Raymond Salvatore Patriarca controlled every card game, every loansharking operation, every prostitution ring, and every illegal business from Providence to Portland, Maine. The FBI called him the most outstanding gangster in Rhode Island. That was understatement. He was arguably the most powerful mob boss outside New York City, with a seat on the Mafia's National Commission, a hidden stake in the Dunes Casino in Las Vegas, and tentacles reaching as far as Miami and Philadelphia. And his base of operations wasn't Chicago. It wasn't Boston. It was the smallest state in the Union, a city of fewer than 200,000 people, where the man who ran the underworld and the man who ran the courthouse sometimes lived 3 miles apart. To understand how that was possible, you have to understand one thing about Providence that no other American city quite replicates: the geography. Providence is a city built on 2 hills. To the east, across the Providence River, rises College Hill, home to Brown University, the Rhode Island School of Design, Benefit Street with its colonial mansions and Federal-era townhouses, the Providence Athenaeum, one of the oldest libraries in the country. This is where the old Yankee families lived, where the money that built Rhode Island's textile mills was managed, where Roger Williams himself first settled in 1636. College Hill is and has been for 3 centuries the seat of legitimate power, respectability, and inherited wealth. To the west, on the other side of downtown, sits Federal Hill. The names on the mailboxes are different here. This neighborhood was Irish in the 1850s, famine immigrants who worked in the foundries and textile mills. But by the early 1900s, it had become Providence's Little Italy, one of the most densely packed Italian neighborhoods in the country. The tenements on Atwells Avenue stacked 3 stories high, with shops on the ground floor and families above, just like in the old country. By 1930, an estimated 20% of Providence's population was Italian. And by 1914, the neighborhood had already erupted in what became known as the Macaroni Riots, a food price crisis in which the cost of pasta on Federal Hill spiked 66%, and Italian immigrants stormed the store of a wholesaler nicknamed the Macaroni King, smashing windows and throwing food into the street. 2,500 rioters clashed with 300 police officers on Atwells Avenue. The authorities fired so many bullets they had to send for 1,200 additional rounds from the central station. The riots said something about Federal Hill that would remain true for the rest of the century. This was a neighborhood that took care of its own problems, with its own rules, and the city's official institutions were mostly there to clean up afterward. As the Boston Globe once put it, everything in Providence is built on duality and dichotomy, from the 2 hills that make up the city, one controlled by the mob, the other home to the WASP elite, to the mayor himself. Between those 2 hills lay downtown, the State House, City Hall, and the Providence River, which for much of the 20th century ran through underground culverts hidden from view. A decent metaphor, it turns out, for how the city actually worked. Raymond Patriarca was born in Worcester, Massachusetts in 1908, the son of an Italian immigrant from the village of Artsay in Lazio. His family moved to Providence when he was 4. He dropped out of school at 8 to shine shoes and work as a bellhop. By his teenage years, he had been charged with hijacking, armed robbery, assault, safe-cracking, and auto theft. By his early 20s, he had been convicted under the Mann Act for running a prostitution ring, a year and a day in federal prison. Before Prohibition ended in 1933, He'd already been indicted as an accessory to murder. During the 1930s, the Providence Board of Public Safety officially named him Public Enemy Number 1. None of this slowed him down. What it did, in fact, was reveal the single quality that would define his career. Patriarca didn't just commit crimes. He bought the people who were supposed to stop him. In 1938, at the age of 30, Patriarca was sentenced to 3 to 5 years in Massachusetts State Prison for armed robbery. He'd held up a Brookline jewelry store and stolen $12,000 in gold and gems. He served 84 days. The pardon that freed him is one of the most extraordinary corruption scandals in Massachusetts history. A politician named Daniel Coakley, an aide to outgoing Governor Charles Hurley, drew up a petition for Patriarca's release. The petition cited the recommendation of 3 Catholic priests who had vouched for Patriarca's character. One priest's name was misspelled. One priest's signature had been obtained through fraud. And the third priest, a Father Fagan, did not exist. Coakley had invented him. An FBI informant later claimed that someone delivered $38,000 in cash to Coakley to arrange the pardon. The resulting scandal was enormous. The Massachusetts legislature launched an investigation. Coakley was impeached, and the state's pardon laws were reformed. But the real beneficiary was Patriarca. In the underworld, the fact that he could get himself sprung from state prison in less than 3 months made him look untouchable. Other criminals looked at that and saw something more useful than muscle. They saw connections. They saw a man who understood how the real machinery of power worked. By the late 1940s, Patriarca was the most formidable figure in New England organized crime. In 1952, the aging boss of the New England Mafia, Phil Bucola, held a retirement party in Johnston, Rhode Island, just outside Providence. It was, by all accounts, a lavish affair. Bucola personally chose Patriarca as his successor. Then Bucola retired to Sicily, where he ran a chicken farm for the next 33 years and died of natural causes at the age of 101, possibly the most successful exit strategy in Mafia history. Patriarca took over and made a decision that would reshape both the crime family and the city of Providence for the next 3 decades. He moved the seat of power from Boston to Federal Hill. He set up headquarters at the National Cigarette Service Company and Coin-O-Matic Distributors, his cash-only tobacco vending machine and pinball business on Atwells Avenue. Members of the family knew it simply as the office. From the office, Patriarca built something that functioned less like a criminal gang and more like a shadow government with its own tax code. He ran his cash-only vending machine business as a money laundering front. The beauty of vending machines being that no one can prove how many packs of cigarettes a machine actually sold in a given week. But the vending machines were only the surface. Beneath them lay an empire of illegal gambling, loan sharking, extortion, pornography distribution, and trafficking in stolen goods, all generating revenue that flowed upward through a network of captains and soldiers to the man in the beach chair. He also held a hidden stake in the Dunes Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas, where he benefited from the skimming of casino revenue, cash siphoned off the top before it reached the counting room, before taxes, before records. He had deals in Florida and connections to the Genovese and Colombo families in New York. What made Patriarca unusual among mob bosses was not the scale of his ambition, but the deliberate modesty of his style. His operation was loose and informal, more like a legitimate business than the rigid hierarchies of the New York families. He met with captains and soldiers at the office the way a CEO might take drop-in meetings. This informality made him harder for law enforcement to penetrate. It also made Providence uniquely vulnerable, because it blurred the line between the criminal and the legitimate in ways that a more theatrical mob presence never could have. What did it mean for the Mafia to run a city? It wasn't like Patriarca sat in the mayor's chair or signed municipal bonds. It was subtler than that, and in some ways more complete. Every card game in Providence owed Patriarca a cut. Every bookmaker in Rhode Island paid tribute. If you wanted to operate a gambling operation, a prostitution ring, or a loan sharking business anywhere in New England, you needed his permission. And permission came with a price. A weekly payment sent up the chain to the office on Atwells Avenue. A former state police superintendent, Colonel Brendan Doherty, who spent 24 years in the intelligence unit focused on organized crime, described it this way. There was an arrangement between the police and organized crime in Providence. It was unspoken, but well understood. The Mafia was expected to keep the lid on, to prevent violence from spilling onto the streets. In exchange, the police didn't look too hard. Restaurants on Federal Hill paid tribute to Patriarca for protection. The Providence Police Vice Squad commander told FBI agents he could not find anything about Patriarca's involvement in illegal gambling. Other officers said the same. Meanwhile, a Massachusetts Crime Commission report estimated the illegal gambling network that Patriarca controlled at roughly $2 billion across the region. People knew, police knew, the FBI knew. But as agents wrote repeatedly in their files during those years, people are intensely loyal to him and in fear of him, and it is virtually impossible to obtain witness testimony of his activities. Then, in 1962, the FBI did something that would slowly begin to unravel the whole operation. Agents planted electronic listening devices inside the office on Atwells Avenue. The motivation was partly personal. In 1960, Attorney General Robert Kennedy had ordered a national crackdown on the Mafia, and FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, who for years had denied the existence of any national crime network, eventually relented after John F. Kennedy became president. Patriarca made himself a special target. During congressional hearings, he reportedly taunted the Kennedy brothers with a remark so vicious about their sister Rosemary that Robert Kennedy allegedly told a friend afterward he and his brother would be going after that pig on the hill. For 3 years, from 1962 to 1965, the Bugs recorded everything. What the Bugs captured was a remarkable portrait of how organized crime had woven itself into the fabric of legitimate governance in Rhode Island. On the tapes, Patriarca and his associates discussed political payoffs to state legislators, to judges, and to officials in the governor's office in both Rhode Island and Massachusetts. They discussed gambling debts, collections, and who owed what to whom. The recordings revealed that Patriarca didn't just corrupt individual officials. He had built a system. He was overheard advising an associate to get more involved in politics. Not to run for office, obviously, but to understand where the levers were and who could be bought. The tapes also confirmed what everyone on Federal Hill already knew by feel, that the neighborhood existed under a kind of martial law with Italian cooking. On August 10, 1955, a man named George Tiger Balletto had been drinking orangeade and vodka at the end of the bar at the Bella Napoli Cafe, 93 Atwells Avenue, when someone shot him in the back several times. Police reported that a dozen witnesses in the cafe had been stricken with total loss of memory. That was the rule on Federal Hill. You saw nothing, you heard nothing, and in exchange, the neighborhood stayed orderly. The restaurants stayed open, and the tribute kept flowing uphill to the office. The man who would test Patriarca's system most fatally was a Providence bookmaker named Willie Marfio. Marfio ran card games and dice games in various locations around Federal Hill. By the early 1960s, he was doing well enough to brag loudly that he didn't need Raymond Patriarca. He refused to pay his weekly tribute. He refused to pay gambling debts to the bookmakers who worked under Patriarca. This was, in the logic of that world, an unforgivable insult. Several contracts were put on Marfio's life, then called off for various reasons. On the morning of July 13, 1966, Marfio walked into the corner kitchen restaurant at 376 Atwells Avenue, as was his habit, for coffee and pastry. A lone gunman entered the restaurant, tapped Marfio on the shoulder, and ordered everyone else to lie face down on the floor. He forced Marfio outside and into a telephone booth directly in front of the restaurant. Then he fired 4 shotgun blasts. Less than 2 years later, Marfio's brother Rudolph and an associate named Anthony Malee were gunned down inside a grocery store on Pocasset Avenue. It was a Saturday afternoon in April. Rudolph had been shopping for groceries, as he did every Saturday. 2 masked men walked in and killed both men. It was, in the calculus of Patriarca's world, a simple matter of accounting. You don't refuse to pay. And if you try to avenge the man who refused to pay, you become part of the debt. The Marfio murders proved to be a turning point. A Patriarca hitman named Joe Barboza, known as the Animal, was arrested on weapons charges in 1966. When Patriarca didn't post his bail, and when 2 of Barboza's friends were murdered while trying to raise money to get him out, Barboza decided to talk. His testimony led to the indictment and conviction of Patriarca for conspiracy to murder Willie Marfio. Patriarca was sentenced to prison in 1969 and didn't return to Providence until 1975. But here is the thing about Patriarca's system. It worked even when he was behind bars. He continued to run the family from inside prison. The hierarchy held, the payments flowed, the arrangement with the police continued. The only significant disruption came not from law enforcement, but from within, and it came in the form of what is still considered one of the largest heists in American history. On August 14, 1975, while Patriarca was still serving his sentence, 8 armed men drove to 101 Cranston Street in Providence's West End. The building was a red brick former church that now housed Hudson Fur Storage, a commercial storage facility. Behind the racks of expensive pelts, hidden from public view, was the Bonded Vault Company. 146 large safe deposit boxes, each 2 feet high, 2 feet wide, and 4 or 5 feet deep. This was the Patriarca family's unofficial bank. Maid members and associates stored their unreported cash, their gold bars, their gems, their jewelry here, under false names beyond the reach of the IRS. Robert the Deuce Dussault, the lead man, walked in wearing a crisp gray suit and carrying a briefcase. He drew a revolver on co-owner Samuel Levine, ordered the employees to cover their heads with pillowcases, and locked them in a bathroom. Over the next 90 minutes, the crew pried open the boxes with crowbars and stuffed duffel bags with an estimated $30 million worth of valuables, roughly $180 million in today's dollars. One of the hostages, a woman named Barbara Oliva, could see everything. The pillowcase they'd put over her head was threadbare and transparent. Her testimony would later become the key evidence in the case. Dussault, meanwhile, took his share of the cash, about $64,000, and headed to Las Vegas, where he blew through it gambling. When he started calling associates asking for more money, they sent a man named Chucky Flynn to kill him. Dussault confronted Flynn with a shotgun in a Vegas parking lot. Both men broke down crying and couldn't go through with it. The whole thing unraveled from there. Dussault was eventually arrested, confessed, and entered the witness protection program. He got a job at the Coors Brewing Company under a false name, but old habits proved durable. He went back to robbing jewelry stores and coin shops and died in prison. The heist itself was audacious enough. What made it extraordinary was the backstory. Prosecutors believed, and FBI documents later supported, that Patriarca himself had authorized the robbery. He had, in effect, ordered his own vault robbed. The theory was simple and ruthless. Patriarca had spent 6 years in prison. When he got out, he discovered that the revenue his associates should have been generating in his absence didn't quite add up. Someone was skimming, or his people were lying down on the job. Either way, the bonded vault heist was his punishment, and his collection. The robbers claimed they received less than $100,000 each. The really valuable loot, the gold bars, the top-quality jewelry, the rare gems, reportedly went straight to Patriarca. He had the jewels fenced in Europe. The robbers went to prison. Patriarca was never charged. The trial that followed became the longest and most expensive criminal proceeding in Rhode Island history, and the stolen valuables have never been recovered. If the bonded vault heist showed how Patriarca operated within the criminal world, the case of Joseph Bevilacqua showed how deeply the organization had penetrated the legitimate one. Bevilacqua grew up in Silver Lake, an Italian-American neighborhood of Providence. He graduated from Providence College, served in World War II, earned a law degree from Georgetown, and built a career in politics. He was elected to the Rhode Island House of Representatives in 1954. He became Majority Leader in 1966, Speaker of the House in 1969. His clients and friends included organized crime figures. This was not, in Providence, considered disqualifying. In 1976, the General Assembly elected him Chief Justice of the Rhode Island Supreme Court. He promised publicly to put aside old friendships and causes. Privately, according to FBI records, he reassured mobster Nicholas Bianco, "Don't worry, I'll still keep my connections." For years, this arrangement held. Then, in 1984, the Providence Journal began to investigate. State police officers followed Bevilacqua as he visited the homes of known crime figures. He was also observed frequenting a mob-connected motel for midday trysts. The Journal ran a front-page photograph of the Chief Justice of the Rhode Island Supreme Court zipping up his pants while leaving the Alpine Motel in Smithfield, a motel owned by men linked to gambling and drugs. A judicial commission headed by former U.S. Supreme Court Justice Arthur Goldberg censured Bevilacqua for associating with criminals. In 1986, the General Assembly began impeachment proceedings, the first in Rhode Island's history. Bevilacqua resigned before they were completed. And then, as if the script demanded a sequel, his successor as Chief Justice, Thomas Fay, was later found guilty of corruption as well. There was a joke in Rhode Island in those years. How bad is the recession? So bad the mob had to lay a couple of judges off the payroll. But the most remarkable figure in this entire story, the one who embodies the paradox of Providence more completely than anyone else, is Vincent Albert Cianci, Jr. Everyone called him Buddy. He was born in 1941, the son of a Cranston proctologist. He attended the Moses Brown School, a prep school on College Hill, the other hill, the respectable one. He earned degrees from Fairfield University, Villanova, and Marquette Law School. He served in the Army, and in the early 1970s, as a Special Assistant Attorney General, he helped prosecute the murder conspiracy case against Raymond Patriarca himself. The trial took place in courtroom number 5 of the Providence County Courthouse, a spring morning in 1972, the room packed like Easter Mass. Cianci sat at the prosecution table, a young man in his 30s, facing the 66-year-old crime boss who had been running New England from a vending machine shop for 20 years. Patriarca was acquitted. But Cianci, a young Italian-American lawyer who had publicly taken on the mob at a time when The Godfather was the biggest movie in America, emerged with something more valuable than a conviction, a reputation. He positioned himself as the anti-corruption candidate and ran for mayor in 1974. Providence was a staunch Democratic stronghold, controlled for generations by an Irish-American machine that ran on patronage, payoffs, kickbacks, no-show jobs, and rigged contracts. The incumbent, Joe Dorley, was by several accounts a booze-marinated ward healer whom the Wall Street Journal would not have distinguished from the city he governed. Cianci, a Republican, was a long shot. No Republican had won the mayor's office since 1939. But a fracture in the Democratic machine gave him an opening. The party chairman, Lawrence McGarry, refused to endorse the incumbent, Mayor Joe Dorley, and threw his support to Cianci instead. And then McGarry reached out to the underworld. Gerald Tillinghast was a Vietnam veteran who had become an enforcer for Raymond Patriarca. He was not a subtle man. When associates of Patriarca called and asked him to help get Cianci elected, Tillinghast initially refused. Cianci had already tried to put him in jail 3 times. But in that world, you don't refuse the boss's friends. Tillinghast met with Cianci face to face. He told the anti-corruption candidate he wanted a city job for himself and his partner in exchange for delivering votes. Cianci agreed. On election night, Cianci won by 709 votes out of more than 52,000 cast. He became the youngest mayor in Providence history, the city's first Italian-American mayor, and the first Republican to hold the office since 1939. After the victory, Tillinghast went to City Hall to collect on the deal. He was hired as an environmental control inspector. James Diamond, who ran the Parks Department, objected. "You do not hire professional murderers, period," Diamond said. Cianci's response, as Diamond later recounted, "That's the way the game is played in Providence, and these people have the power." Cianci was not a passive participant in the arrangement. He was, by all accounts, a brilliant and charismatic politician. The kind of man people joked would attend the opening of an envelope. He threw himself into revitalizing Providence. He rebuilt the waterfront. He restored blighted neighborhoods. He attended Little League games, backyard barbecues, parades, and weddings. He became a fixture on the Imus in the Morning radio show. He even marketed his own pasta sauce, Mayor's Own Marinara, and donated the proceeds to a scholarship fund. People adored him. But beneath the surface, he was also turning City Hall into what one federal judge would later call a criminal enterprise, a place where envelopes of cash changed hands as people paid bribes to buy city jobs, contracts, reduced tax bills, or city land. The first crack came in March of 1983. Cianci, by then increasingly paranoid and erratic, became convinced that a man named Raymond DeLeo was having an affair with his estranged wife. He summoned DeLeo to his home on Power Street, on the east side, the respectable side of Providence, College Hill territory. What followed was a 3-hour assault. According to court testimony, Cianci attacked DeLeo with his fists, a lit cigarette, an ashtray, and a fireplace log, all while an armed city police officer stood by. The assault on DeLeo became a scandal. In 1984, Cianci pleaded no contest to felony assault and was forced to resign. The general attitude among many Providence voters was revealing. The man was sleeping with the mayor's wife. He had it coming. Buddy was a great mayor. The city had prospered. What's a fireplace log between friends? And here is where the story of Providence does something that no other American city story does in quite the same way. Cianci came back. He took a job as a talk radio host. He rebuilt his public profile. And in 1990, he ran for mayor again. He won. His second stint in office coincided with what would become known as the Providence Renaissance. The rivers that had run through underground culverts for decades were uncovered and reclaimed. Ornate pedestrian bridges were built. Providence Place, the largest mall in New England at the time, opened downtown. The hugely popular Waterfire art installation, created by artist Barnaby Evans, lit up the rivers with floating braziers of crackling, burning cedar, a spectacle that drew hundreds of thousands of visitors a year and made Providence, improbably, a cultural destination. The Wall Street Journal had once dismissed the city as a smudge beside the fast lane to Cape Cod. Now, national publications were running features about its renaissance. Cianci marketed his own pasta sauce and became a regular on Imus in the Morning. He was a walking one-liner, a self-promoter of genius, and he was doing something genuinely remarkable. He was rebuilding a post-industrial city that many people had written off. The irony, of course, is that he was doing it the old Providence way, with one hand pouring the foundation and the other hand in somebody's pocket. But federal investigators were watching. During the summer of 1997, a grand jury began investigating questionable lease arrangements between the city and a convicted felon named Edward Vacola. The FBI probe, codenamed Operation Plunderdome, expanded rapidly. A local businessman named Antonio Freitas began working as an informant, wearing hidden cameras and recording roughly 180 meetings with corrupt city officials. One particularly brazen allegation in the FBI files claimed that Cianci and an associate had conspired to extort bribes in the form of paid expenses for Cianci's 50-foot boat, named, with characteristic Providence cheek, the Nicola, in exchange for liquor licenses. On April 28, 1999, more than 50 FBI agents stormed Providence City Hall. They arrested the chairman and vice chairman of the Board of Tax Assessment Review and seized crates of documents from 5 offices. The investigation ultimately interviewed more than 500 people. A federal grand jury issued more than 200 subpoenas. The evidence included a devastating video of Frank Correnti, Cianci's chief of administration, accepting a bribe. In April 2001, a 97-page, 30-count indictment was unsealed, charging Cianci and 5 others with racketeering, conspiracy, extortion, mail fraud, and witness tampering. The trial lasted 7 weeks. It featured, as one reporter wrote, a local who's who of wise guys and mob wannabes. The judge, Ronald Legou, offered what may be the single most damning sentence ever spoken about any American city's government. Clearly, there is a feeling in city government in Providence that corruption is tolerated. In this mayor's 2 administrations, there has been more corruption in the city of Providence than in the history of this state. Cianci was found guilty of racketeering conspiracy. He was sentenced to 5 years and 4 months in federal prison. An FBI agent wrote in the case file, "Now that the systemically corrupt racketeering enterprise that has been led by former Providence Mayor Vincent A. Cianci, Jr. for the past 20 years has now been completely dismantled by the FBI, captioned matter is considered closed by the Boston Division." It is worth noting that a separate federal investigation of Cianci's first administration in the 1980s had already led to 24 convictions of city officials. The Plunderdome case was the second time the same man had been at the center of the same kind of corruption in the same building. He served 64 months and was released in 2007. He later referred to his prison term as a bump in the road. He ran for mayor again in 2014, his first and only electoral loss to Jorge Elorza. He died on January 28, 2016, at the age of 74. The city he had governed for more than 21 years, over 2 separate stints, a city he had both transformed and corrupted, honored him with a public viewing at City Hall. The thread that runs through all of this, Patriarca, Bevilacqua, Cianci, the bonded vault, the arrangement, the 2 hills, is not just that Providence was corrupt. Lots of cities have been corrupt. The thread is that in Providence, the line between legitimate power and criminal power was not a line at all. It was a revolving door, and sometimes it wasn't even that. It was the same room. The prosecutor who fought the mob got elected by the mob. The Speaker of the House became a Chief Justice who kept his mob connections. The city's unofficial bank was hidden inside a fur storage warehouse in a former church. The mayor who presided over the Renaissance also presided over a racketeering enterprise. And all of it somehow worked, for decades, in a city so small that the crime boss and the Chief Justice and the mayor and the mob enforcer could have bumped into each other at the same restaurant on a Friday night. In Providence, they probably did. Raymond Patriarca died of a heart attack on July 11, 1984. He was 76 years old. He died at his girlfriend's house on Douglas Avenue in North Providence. Not at his wife's home, not at the office. Emergency workers found him in full cardiac arrest. They rushed him to Rhode Island Hospital. He was pronounced dead at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. The Boston Globe noted that in a business where violent death is often inevitable, Patriarca died relatively peacefully. He was buried at Gate of Heaven Cemetery in East Providence. His son, Raymond Jr., took over the family, but he was widely considered a weak successor. He lacked his father's instinct, his discipline, and his ferocity. The New England Mafia descended into infighting and bloodshed. In 1989, the FBI secretly recorded a mob induction ceremony in a house in Medford, Massachusetts, one of the first times such a ritual had ever been captured on tape. The agents listened as new members pricked their trigger fingers, held burning holy cards, and swore the oath of omerta, the code of silence. The recordings were devastating. In 1990, Junior and 21 others were indicted in what the FBI described as the most sweeping attack ever launched on a single organized crime family. Junior pleaded guilty to racketeering charges and was sentenced to 8 years. When he got out, he retired from organized crime and disappeared into private life. But the Patriarca family's influence didn't simply vanish when the boss died and his son went to prison. That is the final unsettling dimension of this story. The roots Raymond Patriarca planted in Rhode Island soil went deep, and they kept producing. As recently as October 2022, nearly 40 years after the elder Patriarca's death, a senior deputy chief of staff at the Rhode Island State House resigned after state police discovered he was a silent partner in a marijuana-growing business with a Patriarca family associate. Surveillance cameras recorded the two men meeting just outside the State House in December 2020 for a 20-minute conversation. The former chief of staff was also documented attending a Christmas party at a Providence restaurant with high-ranking Patriarca mobsters. The family's name is different now. The operations are smaller, the violence less brazen. But the infrastructure, the relationships, the favors, the quiet meetings just outside the centers of legitimate power is recognizable. Today you can walk down Atwells Avenue and see the gateway arch that marks the entrance to Federal Hill. A sculpture called La Pina, a bronze pine cone, a traditional Italian symbol of welcome and abundance, hangs from the center of the arch. Tourists sometimes mistake it for a pineapple. The median of the street is still painted in the green, white, and red of the Italian tricolor. There are more than 50 restaurants and bars within a few blocks, and De Pasquale Plaza fills with outdoor diners on summer evenings. The Providence Tour Company offers a walking experience called Crime and Cuisine. You eat house-made meatballs and learn about mob hits, all in the same afternoon. The address where the Coinomatic once stood, 168 Atwells Avenue, is no longer a vending machine front. The old man in the beach chair has been gone for 4 decades. But if you stand on that sidewalk and look east, across Interstate 95, you can see the dome of the Rhode Island State House gleaming on Smith Hill. And if you turn west, you're looking up the same street where Willie Marfio was forced into a phone booth and killed, where tribute was collected and debts were settled, where a future mayor's enforcer knocked on doors to collect votes, and a chief justice drove to a motel in the middle of the day. Providence's two hills still face each other across the downtown, as they always have. College Hill, with its colonial homes and ivy-covered lecture halls. Federal Hill, with its red sauce and its long memory. Between them, the river the city once buried underground now runs in the open, lit by fire on summer nights, as if the whole place has decided it is finished hiding things. Whether that is true is another question. In Providence, it always has been.